Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Empowering Musicians podcast. My name is Michael Manley and I am your host. And I have spent my career as a working musician, an arts and labor activist, an arts administrator. And one of the things that occurred to me through all of this experience that I've had is asking myself if working musicians need a Bill of Rights. And the origin of this is the fact that in all of my work and all these roles, I've often been asked to help musicians out of various problematic situations or been made aware of certain challenges that folks have. And sometimes I just will shake my head hearing some of these nightmare stories because it reveals what for me is a very sort of troubling gap in what I assume emerging working artists and even sometimes very experienced artists and musicians should know or should have been taught, and what they actually know or don't know. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you as a student are going to become, going to college, you're going to study veterinary science. Maybe you're going to become an accountant. You want to study accounting. And in those roles, you get through 4 years of school, maybe 6 years or more if you're a veterinarian. And if somebody asks you, like, what do you expect to make as a veterinarian? And you say, I have no idea, honestly. Well, if my dog is sick and I have to bring him to you for a procedure, how much do you think that's going to cost me? Honestly, I have no idea. I just love being a veterinarian. Similar with a CPA. I'm going to go to my CPA and say, you know, I'm a very, very well-known and popular person. I have lots and lots of friends on social media. And because of that, I'm going to do you a favor and mention you in my social media feed. And in exchange for that, I would like you to do my taxes for free, because exposure is awesome. And I think you're going to get so much exposure from doing my taxes for free. It's hard to imagine anybody but an artist. And by artist, I mean musician, visual artist, creator of any kind, being that kind of naive and also open to exploitation, right? But this often happens with all of us because we focus so much on skill mastery and artistic excellence when we're studying. And yet it's unthinkable to imagine somebody graduating in accounting or statistics without knowing anything about how to monetize their work, what their work is worth, what fair standards are, what a projected career looks like, or any of the other nuts and bolts, again, for musicians beyond working on becoming great artists. So the Working Musicians Bill of Rights is really a working artist Bill of Rights, and it's my attempt to create the most basic floor of expectations for professionals. And it's by no means definitive or complete, but it's really meant to start a conversation on basic standards and expectations that all working artists should really look for and expect when evaluating opportunities and work in their field. And some of these things may seem really obvious, but again, in my experience in all these different roles I've had, I realize that they're really not. They're not obvious. So let's get into this Working Musicians Bill of Rights, which I'm calling this work in progress. So the first one is, number one, you have the right to be a working musician, even as you embrace your roles as a performer healer, artist, creator, and entertainer. So I posted an article, this same content, which I fashioned into a written piece on Medium. And I posted it on a musician group, and some feedback I got was, I don't know why, you're excluding me. I'm just as much a person. I play for fun, or I actually don't monetize my work, and I'm an artist as well. And I said, you're right. Like, this is really, that's why I specifically call this a working musician's Bill of Rights. And what I mean by working is anybody who is using their art to put food on the table in some way. Not full-time, maybe if you're lucky full-time, but even part-time, whether you're a visual artist or a musician, an actor, a singer, etc. If you're working, I think the expectations have to change. And so this really is a guide to working. This is really a guide for working artists. Now, I want to just say that that's not a judgment, right? And there's no artistic evaluative message in that. If Joshua Bell, the famous soloist and amazing musician, plays violin, if he decided tomorrow that he wanted to be a brain surgeon and he pursued that career and got on the stage of Carnegie Hall and gave a concert for school children in New York City and decided not to charge for it, he's not a working musician, but he's certainly no less of an artist, right? So when I say working musician, I really only mean those musicians who have chosen to put food on the table with their music. And again, it has nothing to do with an artistic evaluation. So the first one, again, is that you have this right to be a working musician. You have the right to be paid as a performer, even as we understand that we have all these other roles as healers, creators, and entertainers. The second one, as a working musician, you have the right to be paid for your work. So again, I used the example earlier about exposure. It's hard to imagine that you could get your transmission fixed from an auto mechanic and ask them to do it for exposure, right? But musicians and other artists are asked to do things for exposure all the time. Or the more subtle version of that is somebody may offer you payment, but it may not be an appropriate payment. And they might be counting on the fact that you don't know that. And we can talk a little bit more later about what that means and how to find out what an appropriate and fair wage is. But underpayment or non-payment is very common in this field. Related to these first two, again, I think is something that other people have encountered as well. But I remember being at a post-concert reception, I believe it was with the New Haven Symphony, an orchestra I played with years ago, and having a patron ask me what I did for work. And I explained to them that myself, along with most of the orchestra, we were all working musicians. I mean, everybody in the orchestra was, to some extent or another. Some of us full-time, some of us part-time who also taught. But again, this idea that we are working artists is something that we not only have to tell ourselves, but we often have to tell others. So related to number two is number three. You have the right to know how much you will be paid and for what work before you accept a job. So, true story. I was alerted because I work for the American Federation of Musicians. I am in the labor field, and I sometimes get things coming across my radar that are like red flags from people because they're maybe not union jobs and they're just questioning them. And one thing that appeared on my radar was an offer that was made for musicians. And this was for an artist, a touring artist, hiring some local musicians around the country to play for a Christmas show. And completely for profit, not a nonprofit. The whole point of the show was to make money, was playing large arenas. And musicians were getting offers in their emails saying, would love to have you play with artist X. Here are the dates. Here's the schedule. Here's what you need to wear. Let me know if you're interested. There's nothing in the communication about what the job will pay. And it may seem shocking to those of you who are not musicians, but this is not uncommon. People will accept offers of work without having any idea of what they're going to make. And we can talk about the reasons for that. I think part of it is the scarcity of, there are few jobs, I better take this one. If I don't take this one, somebody else will take this. If I take this one, I'll get connected to other people who can help me get more work. All of those things, right? And it's just, we can't let those things overrun the idea that we need to be paid fairly. And we need to know what we're going to make. So again, you have the right to know how much you will be paid and for what work before you accept a job. Number 4 is related to number 3. You have the right to know who you're working for. Oftentimes, these kinds of offers will come through colleagues. Hey, I know you from playing in the Acme Symphony Orchestra, and I'm putting together an orchestra for so-and-so, again, at this arena. Here's what the gig is. I know that my colleague from the Acme Orchestra is not going to be writing the check. He or she has just been engaged to call other people and find an orchestra. So this is, again, something that I think we need to be mindful of, right? Who am I really working for? What's going to happen if I don't get paid, or if I don't get paid in a timely manner? How do I resolve disputes? Is there a contract in place for this work with the parent company of the producer? And if so, who's signing that contract? Who is actually engaged to provide this music for this artist? And all of those things. And again, it's hard for most people who are not artists to even relate to that, because they're like, of course, I would never show up for a job without knowing who I'm working for and how I'm going to get paid and when I'm going to get paid. And if I'm going to be responsible for paying taxes, or if the building is insured, all of those questions. And again, artists, we tend to get really excited about opportunities without asking some of these more nuts and bolts questions, because one, we want to share what we do with the world. It's our nature to want to help and serve the world through music or through our art. And 2, it's not trained into us as it is scales and arpeggios and other things that we learn, that we need to be very scrutinous of opportunities when they arise. And so this is pretty common in our world. And I think it's just something, again, that we need to be aware of. You have the right to be treated as an employee when you're working as an employee. So this is a big problem that's gone way back with musicians, right? And it's just hitting other markets more later, much more common now. But if you think about Uber drivers or Lyft drivers, and the fact that they're in this, what for many people have coined the term gig economy, feels like a new model, right? Where, well, I'm driving, but I'm kind of making my own hours and I'm choosing when to do it and when not. And so I'm really working for Lyft, but I'm not really a Lyft employee. except that I really am a Lyft employee. But all of my earnings are not, I'm not paying into Social Security or unemployment or any of those things because I'm being treated as an independent contractor. This puts a lot of tax burdens on you if you are an independent contractor and your wages are being reported on what's called a 1099 versus a W-2, right? So one of the things, and this has been happening with musicians way, way earlier, but it's now happening to a lot of workers. And this has a detrimental effect on many, many levels. If I believe that there are people in our society in America who want to starve the social what's the word I'm looking for? Safety net, the social safety nets that we have, so that they can get rid of them, right? So why do people want to treat you as a 1099 or independent contractor? By not paying into Social Security, by not paying into Medicare, by not paying into all these things, all of those funds shrink, and it increases the argument to say, look, we can't afford those things anymore. So there's a macro kind of 1,000-foot view of why it's damaging to all of us when people who are really truly employees are treated as independent contractors. But on the micro level, on your level, it means that if you're working for $150 for a job that's 1099, it means you're going to be paying taxes on that $150. And that $150 for that gig is probably going to be more like $100 at the end of the day. And we need to demand that when we are truly employees, that we're treated like that. And there have been several cases of orchestra musicians who had to fight to be classified as employees. They're reporting to the location that they're told to report to. They're wearing a dress code that the employer determines. They're playing repertoire that they have no control over. These are not independent contractors, right? So this is a problem, again, that extends beyond the arts, but certainly has been occurring in the arts for a while, which is that we're treated as independent contractors when we're really employees. And so knowing that we have that right to say, wait a minute, if I'm reporting regularly for work, and I'm not really freelancing, I really am not an independent contractor in that situation. I really am an employee. So number 6, you have the right to meals, transportation, and lodging when scheduling and location make them appropriate and necessary. Again, going back to the Acme Symphony job that I referenced, where my good friend in the orchestra offered me this great opportunity to play with Star X at the local arena. And I noticed on the schedule that there was a rehearsal from 2 to 4, and then the concert wasn't until, like the sound check wasn't until 6:30. So I'm going to be stuck there from 4 to 6:30. Am I going to have a dressing room? It's the summer. It's 95 degrees out. Am I going to be sitting in my car? Is there a green room? Am I going to get a meal? All of these things are important questions. And again, these details that we need to know beforehand. And again, if I'm stuck at the site and I can't leave for whatever reason, maybe it's a remote, it's just too hard with security to get in and out. Maybe I only have an hour between the end of the rehearsal and the sound check. I want to know, is somebody going to give me a meal, or am I going to be treated as I should be as a professional in that situation? So similarly, if I'm driving 100 miles on my own dime, am I going to get gas reimbursement for that? Is there a bus being provided if it's a 3 or 4 cities in a row that I'm playing with this artist that are nearby? So again, number 6, you do have the right to meals, transportation, and lodging when scheduling and location make them appropriate or necessary. Again, maybe I'm playing 2 nights and I'm playing in a location that is a flight away. Is the employer providing me a hotel because I'm playing 2 consecutive nights at the showroom in Resort X, right? So number 7, you have the right to a safe, respectful, and harassment-free workplace. This is a real concern of mine, again, because if I've been hired by my friend who plays viola in the Acme Symphony and I report to a job, what's going to happen if I am inappropriately treated in that job? What's going to happen if I encounter something really unsafe in the workplace? Who do I go to? Who do I report to? All of these things are really important and often are not something that we know because there's this opacity to sometimes the way these gigs work, right? Like, I know that I'm getting the call from my friend who plays violin in the Acme Symphony, but I don't truly know who I'm working for. I therefore don't know who to go to if I have a problem on the job. So all of these things are really important. Number 8, you have the right to breaks, defined work calls, and overtime. Again, if I have a 4-hour rehearsal, am I going to have a break? Is that defined? Where is that spelled out? Now, people ask me, sometimes when I tell them that musicians have a union, they say, oh, why do musicians need a union? Well, these are the reasons, right? And all artists really need protections. And this is why standards and fair treatment are just often not handed out, right? Unfortunately. And we have to sometimes collectively come together and demand these things. So a lot of these things are kind of expected and a matter of course in what we call organized work, which is unionized work. But again, even if that's not happening or that's not the case with this job, I'd like to know, what are the break? What is the break schedule? What are the defined work calls? And am I going to get paid overtime if we go over? So number 9, you have the right to the ownership of your recorded work and to consenting to your work being recorded. Again, if we are working under a union agreement, this is often this protection is already there for us. I can't think of any union agreements that I've come across that don't have this protection already built into them. It's something that we, as working artists, have taken seriously and wanted to protect. And I will give you, again, another real life example. And I got a call one day from one of Michael Jackson's musicians, which was really cool because I was like, wow, somebody who played with Michael Jackson, like that's the most awesome thing. And how can I help you? Happy to help out, like a really cool star performer. And this was shortly after his death. And there was a film called This Is It. It was a film that was made up of just hours and hours of tour footage that were distilled down into a movie. Well, this musician, along with the rest of the band, they're all over this movie, and their images, they're playing, all of it. They're just all through the movie, and the movie was a huge financial success, as is anything associated with Michael Jackson or his estate, right? So the question was posed to me from this musician, well, where's my residual for this, and am I going to get paid for this? And I did some digging, and it turns out that when he and his colleagues were touring with Michael Jackson, they actually didn't have any union agreement in place. So there was this protection which would have normally been there, that would have been the mechanism by which we could then pursue those payments was not there. And I just sort of had to say, like, I'm really sorry, but there's just not much that can be done through our union. I suppose he could have sued the Michael Jackson estate and tried to get some remedy, but often in those situations, if you don't have a labor agreement, a union agreement in place, you're often made to sign some sort of release that's in your personal service contract that says, I'm waiving all my rights to my recorded work. That's pretty standard, right? Because again, these employers and these producers, they want the right to be able to use your work without ever paying you again. But you have to be aware of what that means and what you're giving away, right? So number 10, you have the right to say no to work offers which are not in alignment with these basic rights. So this is something that is extremely empowering, is when you finally say no. And again, I'm in a place in my life where I'm not making my living exclusively as a musician right now. And so I do sometimes volunteer my services. Now, I don't do it when somebody else is making money. That's just an absolute no, because that's called exploitation, right? But I do it if it's with an organization that I'm helping to try to build, or if it's a mission that I believe is important. And I do enjoy that ability to serve through music. And I'll give you, again, a real life example. I was doing this with a community band in Los Angeles when I lived out there. A friend of mine conducted it. And one of the other horn players said, well, you know, I play with this community orchestra, and there's this really cool gig coming up where we're doing a video games live concert. And I thought, oh, that's cool. And it's going to be at, you know, the Pasadena Civic Center or whatever it was. And do you want to do it? And I said, well, can you tell me more? And it turned out that it was the orchestra was kind of being hired to do this. And in fact, they were charging tickets. And the producer was not a nonprofit. It was a commercial venture, and it was designed to make somebody a lot of money. And so it turned out that the musicians were being asked to play for free. It was a community orchestra. They were used to not making money because it was a community orchestra, which had a budget of probably not very much and was not in the for-profit business. But when somebody engages that orchestra or those musicians to play for a for-profit venture, it changes the landscape totally. And so I said, you know what? I'm sorry, I don't really play for free when other people are making money. I said, I'm happy to play with this community orchestra, or this band at the time. It was a band. But yeah, I'm not going to do that. And, you know, maybe consider that somebody else is making money on this, and if you want to donate your services in that context. I was not willing to. So that's my current list. Again, this is not meant to be definitive. It's just my opinion, based on, again, my experience working in the field. I'm sure you may have other ideas or additional things or have questions. And feel free to reach me on Empowering Musicians Facebook group or through LinkedIn or Facebook and ask me if you have any questions. I'd love to connect with you. So this is what I'm calling, again, this working musician's Bill of Rights. But do we have the right to magically enforce these or demand them? We don't. We have to often, again, work collectively to achieve them. And again, as I said, do we have to insist on them? As I just mentioned, there are times when I don't require payment for my services if it is within the context of an organization that is truly nonprofit and doesn't have resources and is fulfilling a mission that I'm engaged with. I would do that before I would play for, say, Andrea Bocelli for $100. That to me is exploitation. Playing for free for my local community band, let's say, is not exploitation in my view. So again, it's not about whether we're being paid or whether we're not. It's really about who's making money at the end of the day and how much. And we have to really be, I think, judicious in how we evaluate these opportunities and as artists. And I think we have this knee-jerk reaction to say, well, I have to play everything because I need the experience, I need the exposure, I need the connections, whatever it is. But in fact, I think it's really empowering to say, you know what, this doesn't feel right to me, and I'm going to say no to this. And I think one of the hallmarks of a really confident and successful, seasoned working musician is that ability to say no. And I remember the first time I said no as a freelancer, it was extremely empowering to me. And I was like, you know what? That sounds like a really terrible gig. And I'm just going to say no. And don't ever be afraid to do that, I would say. So this is my list. Again, it's not meant to be definitive. It is meant to start a conversation. Secondly, do we get these given to us on a silver platter? Often no. This is why unions exist. And we could talk more about that next time. But do give me some feedback on what you think about this. And you can always find me on Empowering Musicians Facebook group, Empowering Musicians podcast on YouTube, and on LinkedIn and Facebook. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, take care. Bye-bye.